Yeah, I mean, I made a little list actually of when I was watching and like researching the franchise just, because there were so many things and like it includes
Oh no.
being bisected or trisected by flying wire, burning to death in a tanning bed, being caught in a pool drain and having your organs sucked out through your butt, being crushed between the floor and a moving elevator, being crushed by weights at the gym, being hit through the eye by a rock kicked up by a lawnmower, shot by a nail gun in the head, and of course, a grill explosion.
Like the gold teeth
No,
you wear,
no,
like
no. You
all
know what I
long?
mean. No, not that kind of grill. You know that. You just want to talk about that. Right.
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Hey, hey, hey.
Hey, hey, hey. Hi, Hakeem. How you doing?
Hi, Tamara. What's happening? How you been?
I just had a feeling I was going to see you today.
Was it an itch?
Perhaps it was a hallucination, maybe a little bit of a dream, maybe
Ooh,
a precognition.
a precognition. Wow. Maybe
Hmm.
you are quantum entangled with your future self, or you're moving strangely and you're far away.
That is very spooky, as some folks like to say.
Yeah.
That is also something a lot of movies like to explore. Which brings us to our topic for today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Does It Fly? I'm Tamara Krinsky here with Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi, aka Dr. O. And today we are talking about the 2000 paranormal thriller Final Destination and the conceit of precognition.
Precognition. Yes. I'm so happy to talk about this because this is something I've been wrestling with my entire life. I feel like it's real. So I'm just going to lay it out there.
Okay, so
I think precognition, something is happening in the real physical world.
Okay, so let's give a little bit of background to folks who may either not be familiar with the movie or maybe just haven't seen it in a while.
And by the way, you did use a big ass word, precognition. So I don't even know if...
Yeah, no, that you
Yeah.
okay, so that's another kind of paranormal because you just read my mind because I thought we should break that down too.
Yeah, see, there we go.
There we go. All right, so first we'll do the movie, then we'll do
Yeah.
precognition, and then
Yeah.
we'll do the science, and then we'll do
Yeah.
the story, and then we'll do the vibes.
Then we'll do the
All right,
vibes.
so Final Destination, 2000 movie. It was directed by James Wong, and it was written by Glenn Morgan, Wong, and Jeffrey Reddick. And this movie has spawned a massive franchise. There are 5 currently existing films. The 6th film, Final Destination Bloodlines, is being released in spring 2025. There are also novels based on Final Destination detailing some of the things that have happened in the movies, as well as more stuff. There are comic books. And today we are primarily going to be focused on the movies, primarily the first movie. And little reminder, the premise for all of the Final Destination movies is that there is a small group of friends, well, sometimes friends, sometimes more like frenemies, who narrowly escape a grisly death due to the fact that one of them has had a vision that this death is going to occur. They escape, but throughout the rest of the movie, the majority of the survivors then go on to experience some kind of grisly or bizarre death, suggesting that it was indeed their time and you cannot escape the design of death.
Oh, just get chills thinking about it. You take me back to the first moment when I first saw it. It was another situation where friends took me out to see this movie. I still remember the friend. I should tell him to listen to this episode. Marcus, you know what I'm talking about. So I had no idea what I was in for. And man, let me tell you, the plot of it is one thing, but the grisly methods of death doing its thing was, it's movie after movie after movie. They come up with new ways to take out people that are a complete spectacle, but really, it just messes with your mind. I just love this franchise. And you know what's interesting to me about it? It's so big. They've had so many movies. And when I think of a franchise that has a ton of movies, I think of the Fast and the Furious. And what do I think about it? Oh, it has a lot of movies. When I think of Final Destination, I think about what actually happens in the movie.
Oh, that's really interesting. Huh. All right. So we'll get more into that when we talk about the story. I'm curious about that. But I want to go back to something you were saying earlier, which is defining precognition. So
Right.
do you want to share that with our listeners?
Oh,
and
yeah.
our
So
viewers?
this is it is typically in the realm of the paranormal. We sometimes, humans, believe, right? We can't say that we observe it, but we believe that we see future events. They can come to us in a dream. Sometimes it's a looser connection, like a deja vu. And sometimes it's just a feeling, right? And so I personally have experienced precognition events. So this is one of those places where I'm like, I am a human being and I have my human experience. And a part of my human experience is my imaginative and reasoning and rational mind, right? And so I study physics. I study existence. I study the universe. So what I ask myself is, when I look at something that my personal experience tells me, I think there actually is something there. But what people have assigned to it historically is really kind of like their best guess. There's no proof of what that is. And it doesn't typically come from a space of, oh, I understand how the universe works, right? It typically comes from a space of the paranormal or spirituality, right? But I ask myself, if something like that is truly happening in the universe, what is the mechanism by which that is occurring? Precognition. I could be like, that's totally bogus because I've never experienced it myself, right? That's how I would be as my rational, how could that possibly be? But I'm here to tell you once again, I have experienced it myself.
Okay. All right. So if
yeah.
it could exist, if it could
Right.
work, how would the science of precognition fly?
How could the science of precognition fly? That is related to, there's two things happening here. There's cognition and there is time, okay? So on the one hand, if you look at our minds create the reality in which we live, including time, perhaps, okay? But then when you study time, you find out that your intuition about time doesn't really match how time behaves in the actual universe. So let me give you one example. We're going to start with Einstein's famous example, and then we're going to extend it into a less known phenomenon that's very similar. And so what I'm talking about here is called the relativity of simultaneity. Here's how this works. One observer can see two events occurring simultaneously, but another observer who's moving relative to the first observer will not observe those two events occur simultaneously. They'll see one happen and then the other happen. Yeah, this is the one that Albert Einstein shared with me when I was a wee lad.
That is a lie. You might have read it when you were a wee lad, but
You almost killed me. Here's what my man Einstein said. He was like, okay, suppose you're on a train. Suppose you have a light in your train car, and at the end of the train car, there are two doors. And each door has a sensor. And when it receives light, the sensor of a specific frequency, it causes the door to open. Now you're seated in the exact center of the train car, and your lamp is in the exact center of the train car, and it happens to emit that special frequency. So when you press the button, that light extends to each end, opens both of them simultaneously, right? But for a person who's on the ground, they see the back of the car approaching, the front of the car moving away from the light. So the back door opens first and then the front door opens second. So two people see the same events. One sees it as occurring simultaneously. One sees it as back door opens first, then front door. We talked about that on this podcast before. Here is the little known addition. It's known as the Andromeda paradox. There's also a phenomenon where, as objects become more distant, time appears to move at different rates just by being more distant. So let me give you an example. Suppose you're sitting down and you're looking at the Andromeda galaxy through your telescope, and you see that a alien race is about to launch their ships and invade another planet. And I'm running past you toward the Andromeda galaxy, pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time as I'm running past you, I throw up my telescope and look. So you and I are side by side now at the same time, receiving light from the Andromeda galaxy from 2.5 million light years away. And what I see, they conquered the planet a week ago.
Why don't I see that?
Because you're in a different motion than me. Okay. So it gets more complicated. It's known as the Andromeda paradox. And basically, it gets to the point of what does it mean to see an event, right? So we're here on Earth, and on Earth, because Earth is small, and what I mean by that is relative to the speed of light, Earth is small. But relative to the universe, the speed of light is slow. So to us, we can see things, we say, oh, this is happening now, right? But when you look into the distant universe, two different people at the same time, one can see one moment, the other could see the moment that happened a week ago, and another person could see the moment that happened a week later.
So
and they're all in the same place at the same time, just moving differently.
Right.
And
So,
yet,
it's not that we're actually standing next to each other, because if you're running, we're not standing.
No, we are.
Next to each other.
When I get next to you, I'm running, but I'm running past you, right? So if one of us running toward Andromeda, one is running away from Andromeda, and one is stationary relative, when we all are lined up, boom, standing right next to each other, we all look at Andromeda through our telescopes, and we all see different times that are separated by days. So what does now mean? What does the word now mean? What does it mean to premonition anything?
I'm going to be honest. I'm confused, but I'm just going to continue going, because there might be other people out there who are not confused. I don't understand how, if we're all standing next to each other, even if you're running in that moment, we're in the same place. But that's very confusing to me. But let's go back to precognition and how this relates to precognition.
Well, because it's about time. So you're saying I see an event before it occurs. The idea is all times are co-equal. That's what the universe is telling us. So what is the mechanism by which you could have access to what you might think of as your future? What could that mechanism be? I think of quantum entanglement. All right. So there's quantum entanglement across space, where two objects appear to be two separate objects, but they're actually one object. And what that means scientifically is that this thing that represents them, this mathematical function thing, instead of having two separate ones, they have one that describes them both. And because of this, they must always be in complementary states. So no matter how far away separate one is, if you make a measurement on one, you know what a measurement of the other one would yield, right? So that seems to be a connection across space and time that makes it appear that space between those two entities does not exist. So could it be that you're quantum entangled with your future self, such that it's like time between you and that future self don't exist? So you see what that future self sees, but just not as, plainly and strongly.
So is that so, for example, in Final Destination, we have Alex, our protagonist, who is the member of this group who has the I don't actually think we've set up what happens in the first Final Destination. So in the inciting incident in the first movie is that Alex, who's one of the teenagers, who is part of this group of about 40 kids going to Paris for their French class trip. And he gets on the plane and he has this premonition that the plane is going to crash, and he freaks out. He gets off. Some other students get off for various reasons. And then they're sitting there in the airport and they look out the window and the plane explodes. So would Alex be the example then of quantum entanglement, ostensibly, where he is somehow entangled with his future self, and he is experiencing what that future self is experiencing, and that is how the premonition happens.
Exactly. Because here's the thing about this entire entanglement thing.
Mhm.
We're talking about something from the realm of quantum mechanics. And the realm of quantum mechanics does not tell you exactly what's going to happen. There are probabilities of future occurrences. The normal classical physics tells you, oh, if I launch a cannonball at this angle and this velocity, it's going to take this trajectory. In quantum mechanics, it is, if you launch it at that angle and trajectory, well, guess what? Here's that angle and velocity, here's a range of trajectories, and I can assign a probability to each one. Okay. So what that means is that also that future is not set. It has to be selected, right? And so it's selected by interacting with the system. So when he sees this future, that is not the future that must necessarily occur. It is the one that has the highest probability of occurring given his current situation. But he decides to change the situation. But here's the thing. There is a conscious entity involved, and that conscious entity is death. And so death is like, I'm
Right.
going to get you. Like you can avoid the futures I'm setting for you, but I'm not going to stop setting them. You are in my Hamiltonian.
I mean, at least that's what it's proposing, that there is this entity, ostensibly.
So here's another element of reality. Okay, so are we beings going through time, or are we consciousnesses that are going through what is known as block time, or this idea that it all exists, and so your consciousness moves through it? Like I might have told you this before, but I was reading some writer who was talking about a book he'd written, and one of the main ideas he got out of it is asking yourself the question, who are you? Who are you really? Are you the one thinking? And then the answer he came to from what he read was that you're the one that's aware of the thinking, right? You're not the thinker. You're the one that is aware of the thinker and is listening to the thinker, right? So that awareness, maybe it passes through this life, right? And it's going through these blocks of time, and maybe it's a cyclic process. Maybe it did it over and over, and maybe it could bridge off, right? So I throw this out there not to say this is what exists. I throw this out there to say, how could reality trick us such that, there is no experiment you could do to determine if it's this or if it's that?
Well, something that I do love about the show and these conversations we have together is that we talk about different conceits, about different, gadgets and gizmos, and whether they do exist or are close to existing, but we also break it down as to, could they exist? Could something be out there? So, it sounds like, in answering the question, does precognition fly scientifically, you're leaving the door open to possibility.
I am leaving the door open to possibility, but I feel like I've made an observation, but it has a huge error bar, right?
Mhm.
It has a huge error bar. I don't have there are degeneracies in the answer for how it may manifest. But, given my own personal experience, I'm going to say precognition flies.
Wow, that was not the answer I was expecting from you.
I know everybody's going to think I'm a kook, but I'm telling y'all, listen, I could talk about them for days. I've had many. So look, something's up with our universe. That's all I'm saying. Something's up with the human condition. I don't know what it is. Haven't figured it out. I'm leaving my mind open.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, something that you mentioned, sort of this idea of, is the universe set? Is there choice? How do probabilities happen? For me, that takes us into the conversation about story and where precognition fits into the story of Final Destination. I mean, and again, like, this is something where, in the same way that you were looking at, like, the possibility of, could it? in a weird way, the conversation about how does precognition exist in Final Destination or serve the story, like without precognition, you don't have a story here.
Right.
That's the basis of the premise of the movie. There are different projects we look at where like maybe we're looking at a certain piece of technology, but if it wasn't that piece, then like it would be a different kind of gun or lightsaber or whatever. But in this case, this is the premise for the film and for all of the films. So I sort of had to twist it around and look at this question of where does precognition fit into this in a different way? Because you take it away, you don't have a movie. There are many interviews with the folks who have worked on these movies, and so depending on who you listen to and what you say, sometimes you get different stories. But
Mm.
the things that seem to be generally agreed on are that the initial idea was actually from a script written by Jeffrey Reddick. And he was writing a spec script for the X-Files. And what a spec script is a script that you write basically as a sample because you hope you want to try and get a job as a writer. So you can do a spec script of a TV show that already exists. So it's like you have the model for the show and you imagine an episode that you would want to see. Or you can do a spec feature, which is a feature that you write without being hired to write it, and then you hope to sell it. Usually, if you're writing a spec TV script, you're not necessarily hoping to sell that script. You're hoping to use it as a writing sample that you submit to the producers or the studio so that they say, oh, yeah, you understand this world. You get how this works. You'd be a great writer for the show. So you're looking to get staffed in some way. But in the case of Final Destination, this started as an idea for a spec script, and he wrote it. And then actually showed it to some friends of his who said, actually, this is a really good idea. You should write this as a feature. So he wrote a version of it as a feature. Eventually, it did get bought by New Line, and they brought in another pair of writers, Glenn Morgan and James Wong, who also directed it. Ironically, they had worked on the X-Files.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
And throughout the course, and this is very, very, very common as different writers work on different projects, things go through development. There were changes that were made. Changes were made to the original concept. Some stuff stayed the same. Some stuff was different. The initial idea apparently came from a thing that Reddick had learned about where there was indeed a plane, someone who was on a plane got a call from her mom who said she'd had this horrible premonition about the plane crashing. She got off the plane, and then the plane did indeed crash.
See?
So,
See, I told y'all.
Yeah. So you just, you never know.
Wow. So here's a question I have. So this is a massive enterprise, right? So you have things like Harry Potter in them, it starts off as some writer, some book, but this started off as a script. So there is a model for, I'm an author of a book, I sell it for a movie, which I did with my memoir, versus I'm the author of a script and I sell it for a movie. Which writer is more profitable?
That is a complicated question, and that is why we have the Writers Guild of America, the union for writers, who can determine who ultimately gets credit on something. And there's a formula for it. It depends on what goes into production. It depends on what makes it into the final movie. It depends on different scripts that are registered. So that is a complicated question that there are legal entities and structures in place to actually answer that question. Because of course, the person who ultimately gets credit for something has a financial interest in it.
Yeah, exactly. And if it goes on to be how many movies? I mean, this is, the basic question is, did the writer end up rich?
There are actually rules for that as well, both with movies and with TV shows. So like when you, for example, when you are watching a TV show and you see the created by blah, 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 created by Shonda Rhimes, it's nice and all, and it's great for the public to see that, but there is actually a financial piece of that. Like that means something. To have that created by credit means something financially. And you have to, there are certain things that have to happen to qualify for that created credit. There's very specific rules around it. And there are also rules around whether something is original or an adapted piece of IP. And that's, in part when there was the writer's strike, And there were a lot of conversations about where AI fit into this. That was a big piece of what the writers were fighting for, because they didn't want the studio suddenly saying, "Oh, this wasn't created by you. This was created by our studio development executive asking AI for a premise that we then gave to you and you adapted," because that becomes a very different financial formula than something that's original. So yeah, so that's a longer
Complicated.
conversation, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
complicated. But it's also, at the end of the day, if you come up with something that entertains millions and millions of people around the world, then you should
Yeah.
be entitled to financial benefit from
Yeah.
that, as other entities like studios and distributors make money
Yeah.
from that
Yeah.
too. If
Right.
you
Right.
create
Just
it, you
like,
gotta make some money from it.
all right. So the story of Final Destination has to
Okay.
reach a final destination.
Yes. Okay. So the story of Final Destination. So when thinking about the story of Final Destination, precognition, no precognition, no story, right? So let's just get that out of the way. Like, it is essential to the story. It's the basis of the story. That's what we're talking about. It's not just a random gizmo or gadget that was invented because they thought it would be cool. It is the story. So let's look at it from a different angle. Let's look at it from a different angle. So thinking about it then as to how it's executed and why it matters, and how do they then, if this is the basis for our story, then how are they able to exploit that for maximum effect? So, so one thing I think about is character, right? Like, if this is what we're looking at, how is it used for character development? How does it deepen our story? How does it help us how does it help us as the audience understand what's on screen? And one thing that I think they do really well is looking at how all of the different characters react to these visions, whether they're the ones having them or whether they are the ones who are around the person having it, because those are two different things, right? And generally, there's one person who's having the vision, although sometimes others are able to not so much see it, but to feel it. So, like in the first Final Destination movie, you have Alex, who has the vision, and then you've got Clear, his love interest, who's also on the plane, who she doesn't see the plane going down, but she essentially feels connected to Alex in that spooky entanglement way we were talking about before. And she gets off the plane because she believes in the vision that Alex had, because she felt it. That's one example. You've got somebody who sympathizes with the vision and buys into it. Somebody who's maybe a little bit more open-minded, somebody who's maybe a little bit more spiritual.
Yeah.
And later on, we find out that Claire's father, died in a tragic accident, and that makes sense that she's been questioning what happens. Does she really believe that, you know, everything happens for a reason? Are there ways to prevent things? I don't know. So she's a little more open-minded about it. It all tracks. For the person who is able to ostensibly see this future event, how do they react? And you see Devon Sawa, who plays Alex, goes through kind of a couple different stages, right? First, he's shocked, then he's confused, then he thinks he's going crazy.
Right.
And
As
then
anyone would.
yeah. And then ultimately, though, he feels responsible
Right.
for trying to essentially cheat death, both for himself and for the others in the film who escape death with him, and who he eventually sort of figures out, oh, wait, there is a design for these deaths. There is something that was supposed to happen. These people are supposed to die, and now they didn't die in the plane crash. So death is picking them off one by one because it was their time, but maybe we can cheat them. So he almost develops, for lack of a better word, like a God complex. So that takes us through his growth as a character, or development as a character. You've also got people who are like in total denial and are like, you know
Right.
what? I don't want to know anything about your vision. I don't know. I don't want to know what's coming next. I am happy to go through this. Ignorance is bliss. Don't tell me. You've got people who react to the idea of what I'll call the fate or free will question. So there's another character named Carter, who's played by Kerr Smith, who, when we first meet him, he's kind of the bully. He's constantly like beating up on Alex. Of course, by the end, they're friends because that's what happens in movies. But
That's how it goes.
that's how it
That's
goes.
the story.
Right. But like mid-story in one of the bigger scenes, he is like, I am not going to let some death entity tell me how I am going to die and when my time here is happening. I'm taking this into my own hands. And he basically tries to kill himself by crashing his car, which again tracks with you've got a bully, you've got somebody who's used to calling the shots, being in control, aggressive energy. So, he's not going to let something else control him. Um, so these are all different examples of, okay, yeah, we've got our premise for the story, but how can we exploit that premise to tell us who these people are and to explore, different ways of being and different ways this might affect us. And I think it does that really well.
I bet you wrote some killer like book reports. Student. I'm like, wow, you really encapsulated that so well. That was,
Thank you.
but it's the deeper stuff, it's that deeper relationship of revealing the character through the premonition, right? Like as you said, I was like, wow, yeah, that is happening. I never see. I ever tell you this story when never mind. What are you saying about the story here? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting too because this is also a movie where it's not like traditional horror films, right? Especially of the time when this was made in 2000. You sort of had a whole legacy of like Nightmare on Elm Street where you had Freddy or Friday the 13th movies for a couple of decades where you had Jason and there was a very clear nefarious entity that you were fighting against. Death is abstract here. And one of the things that, James Wong and Glenn Morgan talked about when they were adapting that script, and sometimes that Reddick talks about as well, is this idea of making it a different kind of a thing than the traditional horror movie, the traditional villain. Death is not like a person. Death is not personified. You get a sense that there's an intelligence there.
Right.
And
Agency.
especially in the way they do certain things with the visuals, like, there's a point
Right.
where, you see in the first death after the plane crash, you see a friend of theirs and there's like fluid that's leaking from a toilet.
Right.
You see it come out and snake around the bathroom and eventually come back. And that's pretty freaky.
Yeah.
So you don't get the feeling that it's just random. I mean,
No,
it
it's not.
definitely
Clearly
is.
not. There's
Yeah,
an agency there.
And they portray that really well. So I think that's an interesting piece of this too, because fate, free will, if you're having precognition, whether you're talking to your future self, whether it's, the universe there. And there's also a lot of theories about where the precognition comes from, which they never come out and explain, at least not directly. They kind of hint at potential ideas in some of the future movies. There's a point where they talk about sort of hint at the idea that maybe death is actually the one who is somehow providing these visions because it allows for a change in things and allows death to have more death. Death is kind
More
of
fun.
it's more, yeah, like death is really sadistic. So,
Yeah.
If it had just been the first thing, it would have just been the people in the plane who died. But the
Yeah.
people in the plane die anyway. And then these survivors go on to be in different situations. And more people die for each situation that they're in.
Right. It's like a
So-
cat playing with his food, but also using it to gather more.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I actually read a fan theory, which I don't think is true, but like my optimistic soul kind of likes, where they said, no, I actually think that it's life that is giving the premonitions, because life, it's the battle of life and death. And I think it's, a good force in the world that's trying, but who knows? But given all of that, I mean, look, does this movie make me believe in precognition? No, it does not.
You're one
I-
of those with no data, no
I
personal
mean,
data.
Yeah, I mean, I do not have personal data. I do believe in intuition. I believe in gut feelings. I don't. I do think the universe is made up of more than we can observe or experience. I don't know that I believe in like visions, and this movie didn't push me closer towards believing in that. That said, I do think that the way they use it to build and create this universe, they've obviously been really successful at it. I think
Clearly.
it flies. I think it flies. So yeah, I would say for the story, they've managed to achieve liftoff.
So let me ask you a question then. Do you think that time is as we perceive and intuit it to be? Or do you think that things like the Andromeda paradox, the relativity of simultaneity, the fact that we do have precognitions, those of us who claim to have had them, do you think time is as you perceive it to be? Because it doesn't have to be a human mind or I'm reading the future thing. It could just be a side effect of a hidden element of existence.
I think that, I mean, based on the things that I've read and the things that I've heard and the rabbit holes I've gone down, no, I mean, I think it's entirely possible that, time is not as we perceive it, both because of, physics and also just because I think we all, again, like we all perceive things differently. And also in my own life, I mean, forget even just like, the ability to be in touch with my future self and have a vision of what might be happening down the road. I mean, just in your day, how often is it that like you've been sitting there and you think you've been there for 10 minutes and you've been there for an hour? How often is it that 3 minutes feels like an hour,
How
right?
often is it like it's 3 p.m. already?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
whoa.
exactly. So like time is not steady, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Right.
Time is
Right.
not something we feel in a steady beat.
We should ask time to go steady. Let's go
Aw.
steady. That always confused me as a Gen X kid. I would watch shows and someone would ask someone else to go steady. I never knew what that meant. Go steady. There wasn't a thing in my world. I didn't know what that was. I knew what a girlfriend, boyfriend, that was.
Right.
Go steady. I never heard that before till I think Happy Days or something. So,
See, this is why you need to watch more musical theater because if you had done a production of Bye Bye Birdie, you would have had to have sung the Telephone Hour song, which has a whole chorus of. Okay, so as
I'm
far as
still
but
trying
this
to learn all of Inspector Deck's lyrics from the Wu-Tang Clan. So,
Um, all right. So, but speaking of this idea of time and how much
right.
time we have,
Mm.
when we talk about our sort of third part of our conversation, does it fly for the feels? We none of us know how much time we have here, right? But my
Yeah,
question is,
most of us for sure.
yeah, most of us, I would say. I mean, I guess it's different for some
People are
people,
on
but
death row, right? They know I'm
right.
going to be executed.
Yes, that
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
yeah. I guess my question is, in general, assuming you are not on death row,
Mhm.
how would you feel if you knew how much time you had left? If you knew
Yeah,
when your expiration date was, maybe not how that
right, right,
expiration date was
right.
going to happen, but at
Yeah.
least how much time you had. How would that
It's
make you
interesting
feel?
that you say that, right? And again, it's because of experience that I sort of have some perspective because I got to watch three people who were in that circumstance, right? If not four, now that I know people who it was cancer in every case. They knew that their time was coming, and they lived their lives in the time they had remaining in such a dignified way, right? Um, there was no woe is me type of element to it, right? It was here's what it is. And in certain cases, like there was this guy, he was a graduate student in engineering. And when I first started going to Africa to work, I would work with this organization called Cosmos Education. And we were in the Southern Hemisphere. And as a science nerd, I had never seen the Southern Hemisphere sky, right? With
Yeah.
the satellite galaxies and completely different stars. And
Mhm.
also being in the middle of nowhere and seeing the Milky Way and nebulae and star clusters. So anyway, I'm like, Alex was his name. I'm like, yo, I'm staying up all night, every night, and I'm looking at the sky. So Alex would stay up with me and we just chat about certain things, right? A year later, he gets diagnosed with testicular cancer and he writes Alex Tung. And so Tungsten at Stanford was his email. And so you might still find it online, but he wrote every part of his journey online to share his journey, and it was amazing. He was a super loving guy. Another one was my PhD advisor, Art Walker, pancreatic cancer, right? The last 18 years of his life. So I would keep it moving as it is. I would get my affairs in order, right? I would take care of those who rely on me to the best of my ability. and I would surround myself with my loved ones. That's how I would approach it.
So here's a question. Those are very specific instances, tragic specific instances of someone with disease,
Right.
where you find out that's why, because it's like a health matter. I'm curious too, though, about, and, obviously, sadly, we've all thought about how we might approach that. I would approach it ideally very similarly, but take that off the table for a second. For knowing it's your time, that has nothing to do with disease. It's, a quick event. It's, there are people who, I mean, like my maternal grandfather, he passed away. He dropped dead at 38. We think of a heart attack, although it's funny because my cousins and I have recently been in touch about this, trying to suss out like what were the exact details, as we're all like trying to be a little bit more responsible about health history.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
that said,
Yeah.
the story that was always told, and for lack of a better whatever, he dropped out of a heart attack at age 38 and he was just
Wow.
gone.
Yeah.
So, whether it's that, whether it's you slip and fall, whether it's one of these crazy things that happens in Final Destination where it's a freak accident, you know, eh, would you want to know that your end was coming? Or maybe you just pass away in your sleep. It's not tragic at all. For whatever reason, you pass away. You're 99 and lovely and you pass away in your sleep. Like
See, you
you had
just
a
turned it
lovely
into, if it's like going to the dentist, right? For those of us who hate to go to the dentist. All right, I'm going to put this needle in your gums, right? And you're sitting there, that feeling that you have as you're,
I don't
you
want-
know, that's the real, that's what's really getting you more so than the actual event itself, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so what's your thought on that? Would you want to know? Would you not want to know?
No, I don't want to know. If it just catches you, you never know what happened. But if you see it coming, you're like, yikes, it's coming.
Yeah.
You don't get to live the time. I've always thought while you're alive,
Mhm.
and you should live while you're alive. Don't, and I'm also a big proponent of not pre-suffering, right? If something is coming down the line, I'm not suffering about it now by worry and control. I can control my mind in such a way that I'm not going to suffer until the event is actually here, right? So this is one that, let me tell you one of my favorite deaths on Final Destination.
Hopefully not yours.
No, it's when a glass falls on the dude. He's walking down the street and the glass from the skyscraper like, and it's flat.
Yeah.
You don't want to know that's coming.
No, I mean, I do have to give props to like the Final Destination universe in the sense of like they've really excelled at just like coming up with, so many different kinds of deaths, of like making this a hallmark. Like you're always waiting to see like, how are they going to do it this time? What are they going to do? Where is it going to come from? And like things that you would make, like the big things you worry about, like flying off of a roller coaster or a plane
Right.
crash or getting hit by a train.
Yeah.
Those are the big things, but then there are
Yeah.
the little things that they get, which are
Yeah.
really just kind of nuts. Yeah. I mean, I made a little list actually of when I was watching and like researching the franchise, just, because there were so many things. And like it includes,
Oh no.
being bisected or trisected by flying wire, burning to death in a tanning bed, being caught in a pool drain and having your organs sucked out through your butt, being crushed between the floor and a moving elevator, being crushed by weights at the gym, being hit through the eye by a rock kicked up by a lawnmower, shot by a nail gun in the head, and of course, a grill explosion.
Like the gold teeth
No,
you wear, like
you
Paul
know what I
Wall?
mean. No, not that kind of grill. You know that. You just want to talk about Right. Right. So like if
Wow.
that's going to happen to me, I don't think I want to know any of
No.
those things. But that
Not
said,
at
like
all.
there's the person and then there who's passing away and, is run out of time ostensibly. And then there's the people around them who experience that. And I mean, again, having lived with this story of my mom for so long and of just like 1 minute her dad was there, the next minute he wasn't. And other friends who have had relatives pass away where they never got to say goodbye. They never got to say, I love you that one more time. They never got
That's why you got to say it
to,
every day.
yeah.
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 Hey, let me add this
Or make
pops to my
or make amends if there were. So I feel
yeah,
like
make
for
amends. Yeah.
me, well, I wouldn't wanna know a long time ahead. Maybe knowing, like, just a tiny bit ahead, and I wouldn't wanna know the how, but just a tiny bit ahead, like, "You've got a week, so how are you gonna use your week?" And making sure you have those conversations, making sure you get that last hug in, making sure that you go to that beach in Hawaii, whatever it might be.
Making sure you find that bully from high school and you go and punch him in the face.
I don't know. Wait, weren't you the one who didn't believe in pre-suffering?
No, they're gonna suffer now. I know. I feel the vibes of premonition. I think that if it's avoiding danger, good. If it is, deja vu, like, yeah, good. But if it is, dude, you're dying in a week. Ah, why do I need to know that?
See, and I'm the opposite. I agree with you about like, yeah, like I've definitely experienced a lot of deja vu in my life, and I always stop and I'm like, okay, what is that? Where is that coming from? Like somebody scientifically one day will understand that and break it down for me. And I definitely believe we have like instincts and where those are coming from, again, like we don't know. But as far like, would I wanna know, does it fly for the vibes of knowing when my death is gonna happen if it's a lot of time ahead of time? No, I don't wanna know that. But do I want the week? Yeah, I want my week.
All right.
I'm a big person for closure, so I want my week for
Okay.
closure. I need that. I need my closure.
I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a human.
Supposedly, yeah.
You're a human being. That's what I get. So
Yeah.
I want to change it just a little bit and give you my vibe. So when I think about this movie for the vibes, I think about the fact that I know what I'm going to get, and it keeps me on the edge of my seat. Even though I know what I'm going to get, I have no idea what I'm going to get, but I know it's going to be juicy and delicious in terms of shocking, horrific horror, right?
Right.
So that part of it, the movie so vibes for me.
Mhm.
Can't just sit down and be, on a given day, oh, let's watch I got to be in the mood for it.
Sure.
But I think just as a franchise, man, I love the vibe of Final Destination. Which brings us to our final destination.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Does It Fly? We are here every Friday with a new episode, so definitely catch us either online where you can watch us or on all of your favorite audio platforms where you can listen to us. And a big shout out to our producers who do an amazing job with both the graphics and all of the supplemental things. If there's stuff that has piqued your interest that Hakeem and I have been talking about, check out doesitflypod.com, and we've got all kinds of juicy links and things like that for you to go down the rabbit hole. Hakeem, where can they find us on socials?
Well, we are on the standard popular social media sites. So you can find us on YouTube, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on TikTok. Does It Fly Pod? That's who we are.
That's right. And definitely let us know what you think about Final Destination. We'd love to hear if you would like to know when and where your Final Destination will be happening. And if you've got ideas for topics that you would like us to address, leave them in the comments. We'll see you next time.